We're going to look at a story called To Heaven and Back by Mary C. Neal. This is a near-death experience story, and it has a lot of wonderful detail about how it feels, how the process feels, and it's interesting to compare that to what Swedenborg reports.
Yeah, and we're going to pair that with Swedenborg's accounts, which can be a little bit light on the emotion side, but are awesome at delivering the framework of why is Mary going through what she went through. Yeah. So let's start with just a couple of similarities between the two. Swedenborg talks about this weird detail that sometimes when you die, you have this short period of time where you're still in your body, but your body's dead, but you're alive, and you actually know it. This is from Heaven and Hell. I've heard from heaven that some people who die before they've been revived are still thinking in their cold bodies and cannot help but feel that they're alive, but with the difference that they cannot move a single part of the matter that makes up their bodies. But so, am I dead? I don't think I'm dead, right?
That can sound like, oh, is that creepy? But I think in many NDE stories, there's something like that. Like a person is at first, before they go through a tunnel or to another environment, they're hovering above their physical body or they're next to it, and they're somehow in the vicinity of their physical body and seeing that it is very lifeless, and yet here they are, very alive and sensing and thinking and feeling.
Even though the body's going through this terrible distress, we're not feeling that. And Swedenborg talks in True Christianity, he writes, when we suffer physically, our soul doesn't suffer, it merely feels distress.
Yeah, and in that quote, he's not actually talking about somebody who's dying, he's just talking about when we go through hard things during life. But I think for a person who is actually starting the dying process, there's a whole force of protectiveness that's being attracted to the situation, and so they have much more, since they're focusing so much on their spirit now instead of their body, they're not feeling the pain or the distress that would be associated with what the body's going through.
If you guys want to hear us talk about that sort of stuff more, we have actually two shows you might like. One is How Angels Take Care of Us When We Die, and then we did another one called Does It Hurt to Die? So what happened, for those who aren't familiar, what happened to Mary? What's Mary's story?
Well, she was kayaking with friends, and they were going over a waterfall, and she went over a waterfall, but unfortunately she got trapped underneath the fall and got pinned down by the force of the water, and she couldn't get out. And she says she had always had a fear of drowning, so there she was trapped under the water. She was trying to get out of the kayak but couldn't, and you would think, worst case scenario, she must be in complete panic, but she turned her mind to God, and then this is what she writes. She says she was filled with an absolute feeling of calm, peace, and of the very physical sensation of being held in someone's arms while being stroked and comforted. I also experienced an absolute certainty that everything would be okay, regardless of the outcome. So no pain, no fear, comfort.
Well, so emotionally, that makes sense. Well, in the context of a loving God who runs the universe, that you'd think, wow, this thing that we thought, and this is the story of all spirituality, I feel like, this thing that we thought was terrifying and bleak and catastrophic is actually loving and ordered and you're taken care of. So emotionally, it makes sense that you need to be comforted right then. But what's the mechanism, what's the process by which that's happening? Here we get to some of the order, because Swedenborg talks about these phases that you go through in the dying process, or these stages. And the first one, you're surrounded by heavenly or celestial or the highest, deepest angels. And that part of what they do is surround you with peace and love through their aura or through their care, and they protect you from anything negative or fearful or evil. So that is most likely how Mary got to feeling what she's feeling, right?
Yeah, exactly. So she stayed in her body at first, in her physical body, and she was aware of her physical body in the water, even could kind of feel the water running past it and everything. But she felt no pain, she felt calm. She felt her body stop trying to breathe, but that was not a panicky situation. It was fine, and she assumed she would die.
Yeah, and so how can you not panic about not breathing anymore? But in the video that started this episode, we had Swedenborg talk about his physical breathing going just about dormant, but this spiritual breathing starting up. So it's not that we're not breathing, we're just breathing in a new way. And maybe that's happening with Mary too.
Yeah. And as far as her emotions, she began to think about her family, but again, instant comfort came, because she writes, she was deeply and profoundly assured that they would be okay even if I died.
Even though it's a nice thing for her to hear, but why are these, whoever she's with, why are they trying so hard to make her feel okay? There is something important about that state of mind for the transition process. Swedenborg writes that in Heaven and Hell, angels take the greatest care to shield the awakening person from any concept that does not taste of love. That there's something about, it's a nice thing to do, but being in that state allows this complex transition to happen.
Yeah, it's very important. So Mary was in her body, calm, in no pain. She started to think over her life, and she says she even started to feel a little bit bored. Like, okay, I'd like to move on with things now. I'd like the process to continue.
Which is so funny, and it seems like that's the way it is for everyone. There is some self-directed steps there. Swedenborg talks about us showing up in the world of spirits, and angels are all around, and they said, don't you want to hang out and party with us, and we're never going to let you go. But we can get to a point where we're feeling a little bit like, I'm a little smothered here. I need to get out and do something else. We do have some agency in our progression.
Yeah, the next thing happens when you're ready for it to happen.
Right.
So Mary finally felt her physical body being pulled out of the kayak by the current of the water, and she was even aware of bones breaking in her legs, which sounds horrible.
Yeah.
And yet she was not disturbed by that. She felt no pain and no distress. She still felt blissful and unafraid. And this is what she writes: while my body was being slowly sucked out of the boat, I felt as though my soul was slowly peeling itself away from my body. I felt my body release from the boat and begin to tumble with the current. At the moment my body was released and began to tumble, I felt a pop. It felt as if I had finally shaken off my heavy outer layer, freeing my soul.
That is such a funny little quirk, that there's a moment of separation, like objects separating, but indicates to me that these are objects. And Swedenborg's adamant about spirits are real, they have substance, so we're actually seeing a separating of things. It's not just okay, they're apart, how do they come apart? It's like this sense of being pulled out of the body, described in our opening video, this two objects, a spiritual and a physical object, separating. Swedenborg describes it in Secrets of Heaven: as soon as the internal organs of the body grow cold, our living substances, wherever they're located, are separated out. This would happen even if they were lost in the 1,000 interlinking passages of a labyrinth. The Lord's mercy, which I've already experienced as a living and powerful pull, is so strong that it could not leave any living element behind. So it's almost like a love vacuum.
Yep, amazing. So Mary's spirit exits her body, rises up out of the water, and then there, kind of up in the air, she sees this crowd of people, spiritual people, coming to greet her. And she says the joy was amazing. They immediately started to telepathically communicate, and the sensation of the whole experience was way more vivid than earthly sensation, she says. And the joy was more joy than is possible to feel on earth, and also more than is possible to describe with earthly language, which is what Swedenborg ran into a lot when trying to describe heaven.
Yeah, that's right. And if you are looking for a little more of the human side of the story that Swedenborg tells, the emotional side, we did do a show called 5 Reunions in the Afterlife, which goes into that a bit more. So then, but where does Mary go from here?
So she is aware of being above the water, and she's looking back at her physical body, and this is what she writes about that. My body looked like the shell of a comfortable old friend, and I felt warm compassion and gratitude for its use. And then she felt her soul being pulled towards this magnificent hall, and it was an amazing looking place, and it exuded this aura of absolute unconditional love.
Both of those aspects, like her attitude toward her body and that pull that you're talking about, fit into the matrix that Swedenborg creates. Swedenborg talked to some people in the afterlife and was basically relaying to them, hey, your funeral's going on. This is what he wrote. I've talked with some just 2 days after their deaths and told them that now their funerals and burial rites were being performed so that they could be interred, to which they responded that it was a good thing that they had cast off what served them as a body for their functions in our world, wanting me to say that they were not dead at all. They were just as alive and just as human as ever, having simply crossed over from one world into another. So they're not horrified that their body is gone, but they're also not dismissive of it. They say, this was useful for me in the world. Just like Mary's not saying, come back, body, but she's saying, thanks, old friend. But then also that pull that she felt. Swedenborg talks about this constant force that pulls everyone into heaven. He says there's a kind of field that constantly emanates from the Lord, which pulls all toward heaven. It fills the entire spiritual world and the entire physical world. It's like a strong current in the ocean that secretly carries ships along. So this is a universal thing. Like gravity here is pulling on everything all the time. And it's a field. It's a thing. It's not just a detail of experience. That this is something you could potentially measure with instruments if you had the right spiritual instruments. So this is not subjective to Mary's experience. Like, okay, you're in this situation, somebody throw together a way to pull her in. This is a system that spreads across time and applies to everybody.
Yeah, it's very real. And then sadness descends on the whole group because it is being realized that it's not Mary's time to cross over yet. All this time her friends have been working to revive her physical body, and she keeps being kind of pulled back in that direction. And she and her spiritual friends there are realizing at the same time that it's not time yet. And it's a little bit of a downer because they had been so joyful to be together. So Mary goes back, and she's kind of sad to leave that beautiful scene, but she knows she'll be back. And she has no fear of dying because death was nothing to dread. She experienced that death felt absolutely wonderful.